Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gad Saad, a man who needs no introduction. Obviously, everybody already knows you. I'm the popular one today for bringing you onto my podcast. Everybody's like, oh my God, I'm so happy for you. They don't realize
Thank
that we're
you.
old chums, that we're old friends.
We are old friends, and it was so good to finally meet you in person. How long has it been now? Maybe 2 years ago you came to Montreal?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
It has been, gosh, it's been that long already. But that was so great for you to make some time to come meet with
of
me and
course.
to have that lovely cappuccino together.
That's right.
It
And
was,
I was
yeah.
there yesterday. You were
Oh,
missed. I
yeah.
was at exactly the same cafe that you and I went to just yesterday afternoon.
That's a great cafe. Um, so yeah, and even before that, I came on to the Sad Truth. You're one of the
Of
very
course.
first people to invite me on, actually, onto their platform and to give me a voice. So I'm always going to be forever grateful for that.
My pleasure.
Um, yeah, and we have an understanding, you and I, because you grew up in Lebanon, of course, till you were about 10 years old or so, which I'm going to ask you about that in a bit more detail. And then, of course, with my family being from Egypt, and, well, I lived in Egypt for a few years, and my dad being Palestinian, it's all a sham, right? Like we're very familiar with that part of the world. And we have that connection. And then, of course, we're both Canadian as well. So both our backgrounds and our current grounds are very similar. But tell us about growing up in Lebanon. What was that like? I've heard a few stories before, and I'd love for you to share some with us here today.
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and to everybody else out there, thanks for joining us. I was born in Lebanon. We were part of the last remaining very small community of Jews, not Druze, Jews, Jews, who were in Lebanon. Uh, some of my ancestors, my immediate ancestors, come also from Syria. They're Syrian Jews, but my parents and my family, my siblings, were all Lebanese. And probably at the time that the Civil War broke out in 1975, when, as you said, I was 10, there were well less than 1,000 Jews that had remained. Most of my extended family had already sort of read the writing on the proverbial wall and left Lebanon earlier, prior to the Civil War. But we had remained. We were really well entrenched within Lebanese society. And then the Civil War broke out in 1975, and as many of you may or may not know, all butchery in wars is, in a sense, measured against the backdrop of the Lebanese Civil War, because it was a civil war involving many factors, but certainly a religious element. It became very, very difficult to be Jewish in Lebanon. I mean, death awaited you in every corner of every minute of the day. Miraculously, we were able to escape. We actually escaped through having PLO militiamen pick us up at the at our house and then drive us to the Beirut International Airport. And the reason why we had to get PLO militia at the time is because the area surrounding the Beirut International Airport was controlled by PLO militia. So there was no way that you were going to get through the roadblocks, the barricades, if they weren't sympathetic to your cause. So I always like to remind people that, we escaped Muslims who wanted to kill us, but we were also saved by other Muslims who saved us. So this is why I never, you know, talk about individual Muslims. I shouldn't need to have to say this, but it's important to remind people there are nice and evil people of all faiths and no faiths. So then we left Montreal, we left Beirut in 1975. I had turned already 11 a couple of
Mhm.
weeks prior to us leaving. We moved to Montreal, but then my parents kept returning to Lebanon, ill-advisedly so, because they still had some business interests. They would leave Montreal, go back straight into the Beirut Civil War. And on one of those return trips in 1980, they were kidnapped by Fatah, which is another
Oh my
Palestinian
God.
group, and some really bad things were done to them. But luckily, we were I say we, but I had nothing to do with it. At that point, I was like 15 years old. But my family and through our parents' connections, we were able to get them out. And so since 1980, no one in my family has returned, even though, as I became a public figure, I would get invited many times back to Lebanon, even, at the level of prime ministers and so on. But I've never felt safe to go back, even though I was guaranteed, oh, there'd be security and so on. A car bomb doesn't care if there's security around you. So I wish I could go back because I probably the main thing that I regret most so far as a parent is that our children don't speak Arabic. So Arabic is my mother tongue. They don't speak Hebrew. And so despite all this incredible richness that we have in the family, my wife also speaks Armenian. They only speak French and English. And I've always dreamed of being able to, going back to American University of Beirut and doing a 1 or 2 year visiting professorship, immersing my children in Arabic, and suddenly they become, flawless Arabic speakers. So all this to say, it's a tragic part of my past. I wish I could return, but such is the reality of life.
My gosh. Well, Lebanon is still quite a mess. So
Yeah.
it's not like there's been an opportunity for you to take your kids there and have that, American University of Beirut dream come true. Um, but I want to ask you specifically, like, just drill down a little bit more about what you were saying about the difficulties of being a Jewish family
Yeah.
in Lebanon. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. So it's important for people to contextualize what it means to be Jewish in the Middle East, and more specifically in the context of progressive modern Lebanon. And I say that with that inflection in my voice because it's progressive and tolerant against the backdrop of the Middle East, right? So you're tolerated as long as you don't wear your Star of David too largely. You're tolerated as long as you don't make too much noise. And of course, we reserve the right to not tolerate you whenever we decide you're no longer tolerable. And so growing up in Lebanon, I talk about some of these stories, although of course I've got many more that I didn't mention in the book. In the Parasitic Mind, in chapter 1 of the book, I talk about some of the realities that I faced as a child growing up in Lebanon. So I'll share a few with you here. And the first one that I'm going to share might resonate with you, if only because you have a Egyptian background. So Gamal Abdel Nasser was a pan-Arabist trying to unify all of the Arab states in he was the Egyptian president, and he was loved. He was a charismatic guy. He wasn't certainly very religiously motivated, but he was unifying all of the Arab nations. So there was this great love and fervor for him. When he passed away in 1970, at the time I was 5, not quite 6 years old, I remember there was oftentimes in the Middle East, you have these street protests where there is this incredible fervor. Actually, the word Hamas means zeal, fervor, right? So there's a lot of energy. And so people are, lamenting and kind of hitting themselves because he passed away. But this is in Beirut, Lebanon. This is not in Egypt. And as people were proceeding down my street, I kept hearing, death to Jews, death to Jews. And so I was in the balcony and I was confused. And I kind of turned to my mother and she says, just keep your head down. Because I was like, well, why are they screaming death to Jews? What do we have to do with this? But that's the reflex, right? I mean, some calamity happens in the Middle East. First instinctual reflex is, death to Jews. It's probably maybe the Jews who killed him, who put something in his water. Second, I'll mention two more stories, and if you want more, I'll share more. Second story is I was about maybe 9 years old, so this is probably about a year before the Civil War started, and we were in class, and the teacher asked the class to, you know, for each person to stand up and tell us what they wish to be when they grow up. So one person gets up, I want to be a soccer player, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a soldier. And one kid gets up and says, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer. to rapturous laugh and, screaming and clapping and so on. Now, that kid knew that I was Jewish, but it was totally normal to say things like that. Third story, my brother, one of my brothers, I have two brothers and a sister, all of whom are much older than me. My brother, who's 10 years older than me, was a champion in judo, Lebanese champion, national champion for several years in a row. And so, as you might imagine, it didn't look good for a Jew to constantly win in these competitive things. It's making the rest of us non-Jewish people look bad. And so he was visited by some men who explained to him that it was time for him to retire because otherwise, maybe an unfortunate accident can happen to him. And so then he didn't want to quit his career, so he then left to France to pursue his judo career. This is before the Civil War. Uh, Now, the incredible story here, the conclusion to that story is that in 1976, the Montreal Olympics happened. It just so happened that they were in Montreal. And so the guy who left to Paris, I think he left in 73, who left Lebanon because it wasn't good for Jews to consistently win this combat sport, is then asked to represent Lebanon in the Montreal Olympics, which he did. So the guy who was no longer allowed to be a judo champion in Lebanon, we could now forgive the fact that you suffer from the terminal disease of being Jewish when it comes to having you hold the Lebanese flag. And that happened in 1976. So that gives you a bit of a flavor of what it was to grow up in tolerant, progressive Paris of the Middle East, Lebanon. You always had to know your place. Now, in terms of the actual war, some of the dangers that you faced, everybody faced, right? I mean, if you go out, there are snipers everywhere. They're going to blow your brain, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or, I mean, depending on the area you're in. The bombs and the indiscriminate killing can happen to anyone. But there were specific dangers that were unique to being Jewish, because what happens in Lebanon is you carry an internal ID, which in Arabic is called hawiyya. It's like a passport, but it's an internal. So if the cop stops you and says, "Show me your papers," you show them this paper. Well, the ID card in Lebanon, the most conspicuous part of the ID card is your religion. And the Jews weren't even called, even though we're Lebanese, right? We're Arabic, right? It wasn't even written in Arabic Yahudi, which means Jewish. It was written Israeli, which means Israelite. So then there's even more animus because you're not really Lebanese, you're Israelite, right? Even though we had nothing to do with Israel. And so why is that important? Because one of the ways that people got killed in the thousands early in the Civil War is that if you were driving anywhere and there was a random roadblock that was set up by some militia group, and there were many militia groups, right? Different Islamic groups, there were some Christian groups and so on. Well, if they asked for those papers and you had Israeli, there weren't many roadblocks that you were going to get out of without a bullet to your head. So we really couldn't. I mean, it was very dangerous to just go and pick up bread because you don't want somebody to ask for your ID papers. And so hopefully that gives you a bit of the timber of my existence in Lebanon.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, I'd heard your story before about you being a child in school and that boy saying, "I want to kill Jews." And you're a father yourself, and I'm a mother, and just knowing, like, just to have a kid have to hear this amongst their classmates, or to hear as a child, what was it? Curse the Jews, kill the Jews. How did your mother respond to you when you said, "Mom, what's going on?" Because
It's
that's a
all,
really difficult.
yeah. You knew that you were different. You knew that there was a secret about you. Now, it wasn't so secretive in that no one in Lebanon knew we were Jewish. Of course, people knew. All they had to do was go to the synagogue on Saturday morning, and then they would know you're Jewish. But you had to know your place, right? Which, by the way, this might interest some people. That's exactly the psychology of someone who's a dhimmi, right? A dhimmi is
Mhm.
someone who lives in Islamic lands, who is part of the people of the book, typically Christians or Jews, who might be protected and tolerated, but know your place. Now, depending on the historical context, your dhimmi status could be really brutal, or it could be that just know your place. You know, when you've won too many consecutive Lebanese judo championships, well, it's enough already. Okay. So my what my mother always taught me is that be careful. Don't know that we're
Don't be
Jewish, and
too
there
Jewish.
don't be too Jewish. But now I'm glad you asked me that question, because there's another story that I would have forgotten to mention to our audience today, which I do discuss in the Parasitic Mind. The day that we left Lebanon and actually took the flight out. So we went from Beirut. We actually landed in Copenhagen for a night stop. So we slept in Copenhagen, and then we made our way from Copenhagen to Montreal when we first moved to Montreal. Well, as we cleared the airspace of Lebanon, the captain, the pilot, said that we had just cleared the Lebanese airspace. And so my mother takes out a pendulum with a Star of David,
Star of David.
right?
Wow.
And she puts it around my neck, and she says, now you could wear it proudly and not hide your identity. So that already is, I think, a rather, uh, a powerful story. But let me close the circle on the Star of David. A few months ago, I think it was a few weeks after the October 7th situation, my wife and son, so my son had just played a soccer match in the east end of the city, and they were coming back, and she had texted me saying, "Hey, do you want me to pick you up?" I was working on my laptop at a cafe, at another cafe not too far from the one that you and I went to. And so as they picked me up and we entered the car, my son said, "Hey, Daddy, if you would have come to watch me play soccer where I was playing today and you were wearing a Star of David, you'd be dead."
Oh God.
This was in Montreal, Canada in 2023. So in 1975, I leave Lebanon and a Star of David is put around me. 45 plus years later, I better take off that Star of David in Montreal, Canada. That doesn't bode too well.
No, it absolutely does not. And that actually is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, because you're somebody, obviously, from everything that you've just told us now, you're somebody with firsthand knowledge of this. You've written books, talking the parasitic mind being one of them. You have the Saad Truth, where you're speaking about these issues, not just these issues, but so many other issues of where people's minds are just, possessed with different absurdities. Um, and now after October 7th, you're seeing that things have escalated so dangerously in Canada. Obviously, the US and the West in general, but Canada, specifically Montreal, where you live, is probably one of the worst cities in our country for how things just, it's like the Kindle was all sitting there, and then on October 7th, it just lit, and everything was just ready to go. And for a lot of people, I'm sure they probably got whiplash. They probably just were just shocked. But you're somebody who has been talking about this for years. You've been talking about the dangers of capitulating to extremism. And this is probably a really difficult question to ask you, but how frustrating does it feel right now? Because I'm sure you don't feel like vindicated. Like I'm sure it must. How are you feeling? How are you feeling now, seeing that your voice has been falling on deaf ears all these years, and now things have come to this grotesque fruition that maybe is even beyond what you would have imagined?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's, I think, I don't know if you mentioned in your question the word frustration, but that's
Yep.
exactly what it is. It's a form of, deep existential frustration, because the reality is, as you said, and exactly to your point. It's not as though I'm sitting and going gleefully, hey, look, I was right. Please pat me on my
Mhm.
back. I'm right. It's, I'm like, God damn it. I wish people would have listened because I mean, the best way to describe it is, God forbid, is the cancer analogy, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can capture cancer very early, and you've got a 96% cure rate. You can catch it a bit later, that percentage goes down, or you can ignore all the signals, and it's good luck to you in the afterlife. You're gone. That's exactly what's happening to the West. And I put out a tweet, not the one. I know that there's a tweet that you recently sent me privately that had touched you a lot, but there's an earlier tweet about a couple of weeks after October 7th where I shared really kind of a somber outlook of how I thought the West would end up being. And I mean, it's something that I'd mentioned in the past, but it was really a very powerful tweet that I think got, I don't know how many, 15, 20 million views. And a lot of people were kind of awakened by that tweet because they always associate me, even when I'm dealing with very difficult subjects, with being someone super optimistic. I'm a fighter. I'm the happy warrior. And yet
I
here I
remember this
seem,
tweet.
right? And I seem like I think it's all over. Pack it up. And the reason, again, to draw on the cancer analogy, imagine if your physician tells you you have cancer and you say, well, as a matter of fact, there is no such thing as cancer. You're wrong. You're spreading conspiracies. But if there is cancer, it's the Jews who are causing cancer, and it's the Jews who are holding the cure to cancer. And therefore, the way I'm going to react to you telling me I have cancer is I'm going to inhale asbestos, smoke 6 packs of cigarettes a day, and inject other carcinogens into my veins because I don't believe that there is cancer. But if there is cancer, it's the Jews. That's exactly what the West is doing. If at least you would think that there is a sense of epistemic humility in the West, whereby they're saying, oh, I think we now recognize that there is a problem. It may be too late to fix it, but at least the old proverbial first step is recognize that you have a problem, then maybe we have a fighting chance. If what your response is, let's double down on everything we're doing, and hopefully the problem that surely doesn't exist will go away, well, then how can we fight? So yes, I definitely feel a sense of dejection. I'm not going to say defeat because then there'd be no point in us having this conversation. There'd be no point in us waking up. There'd be no point in me writing the books. So I still think that we do have a fighting chance, but the likelihood of this being resolved without unbelievable violence down the line is reducing by the day. And it's not hyperbole. It's as clear as dropping a ball and having gravity react to the ball. If I drop a ball 100 times, the same things will happen. The ball will fall to the ground because there's this thing called gravity. People will wake up and people will decide that they've had enough. And when they do that, it won't be through talking and dialogue. It will be through violence. And what a shame, because the West had this anomaly in throughout our history, which is for a bleep in human history, the West had created something that nowhere else had you found: freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, individual dignity, all of the things that made the West great. We decided that we're going to give them away because of these parasitic ideas of empathy and so on. It's tragic. It's horrible.
Now, I haven't read your latest book yet, The Sad Truth About Happiness, but I remember when we were chatting about it a couple of years ago. Um, it was going to be an optimistic. You are generally a very optimistic person, as you know, even when things are as dark as they are, you're tweeting jokes. It's sarcastic, it's biting, it's very, they're sharp criticisms, but they're always, wrapped in this sort of tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic manner. So it kind of lessens the blow of whatever's
Right.
going on. Um, it is really, I do remember those days when it was very clear that you were feeling just despondent, and there's no surprise. I mean, I wasn't, it's no surprise at all. Like I mentioned, you're in one of the worst places in Canada. You're watching history repeat itself. I had friends from New York, from all over Europe, from all over Canada, from all over the world writing to me, telling me the exact same thing. It was, I remember even around Hanukkah, some friends were saying, like, maybe we're just not going to put out any celebration, anything this year. Like, we're going to make sure that we're not so visibly Jewish, very similar to the way you had to be in Lebanon. Um, and it is incredibly heartbreaking to see this happen in really such a short amount of time. I was just in Israel and I was visiting Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and I'm planning on going to the March of the Living, visiting Auschwitz. And it's just so similar. When you watch the slow, you know, it starts off with just conspiracy theories and, just little bits of stories. And then, it just escalates bit by bit by bit by bit. And then even this demonizing or this dehumanization that's in a joking manner, like when you talked about I'm not going to call him your friend, but that student in your
Yeah.
class. And then everybody laughed about it like it was a joke, like, all that kind of stuff is just so incredibly dangerous. And we ignored it for years and years and years, and we didn't think that it was going to amount to anything. And then here we are watching history repeat itself. I am not surprised that people were feeling despondent and depressed, and especially Jewish people were actually feeling quite afraid too, when you have people screaming, gas the Jews, people screaming, burn Tel Aviv to the ground, asking Hamas to make us proud, all sorts of horrible things you can criticize Israel from today till the cows come home, say whatever you want about Netanyahu, but these people are clearly anti-Semitic, following the exact same tropes, the exact same pathway as the Nazis and Hamas and all the rest. And we're hearing the exact same rhetoric on the universities all across the United States today. So my
Yeah.
question
So,
to you is
yeah.
about the truth about happiness, the sad truth about happiness. What sad truth about happiness do you have to share with us about this current situation?
Right. Well, it's funny because oftentimes when I write books, I could have told you that that idea had been simmering in my head for years before I wrote that book. So, for example, The Parasitic Mind is a result of me having been in academia for close to 3 decades. So then when I came to write the book, I mean, it's basically recounting all the insanity that I've seen in nearly 3 decades with all of these parasitic ideas, which start on campus, but then they become the Canadian Prime Minister, right?
Yeah.
So, but the happiness book was actually one that if you would have asked me 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when say the Parasitic Mind came out, hey, what's your next top? What do you think your next book is going to be on? I wouldn't have told you it was the happiness book. What happened with the happiness book is that I saw many people writing to me and saying, "What you always seem to be playful and having fun, even as you said, when you're tackling difficult subjects, and you're such a funny guy. What's your secret? What's your secret to happiness?" So that was one. And then second, I noticed that oftentimes whenever I would post some advice on my social media, which to me seemed rather obvious advice, like assume personal responsibility, get off the couch, you can do it, stuff that people have only been saying for thousands of years, people would respond incredibly positively to that. Number one, because they trust me. Number two, because I've got the right credentials and so on. And so I thought, well, wait a minute. If people seem to have such a longing for, hey, what's your secret to happiness and how you live life? Maybe I can have the actual audacity of trying to take a shot at writing such a book. The reason why I say audacity is because of all possible topics that philosophers have written about through millennia, the topic that's most been covered is how to live the good life. And so I was very worried about whether I could write a book that offered something unique. And so I think the way that I was able to do that is that I took some ancient wisdoms about the good life. Here comes Epictetus, here comes Aristotle, here comes Seneca, here comes Marcus Aurelius. These are all guys that have written extensively about the good life. I then back it up with the latest contemporary science and neuroscience and happiness psychology and positive psychology and behavioral sciences, coupled with my own personal trajectory of happiness, which is unique to me. It's my life. And then put together, hopefully you get a good book. Regrettably, though, so far, it's done well in that, compared to the average book that is published, it's done well, but it actually did not do nearly as well so far, although the paperback is coming out on May 14th. It hasn't done nearly as well as Parasitic Mind. And I don't know the exact reason for that. One reason could be that people associate me a lot more with someone who's trying to, fight all of these bad ideas. So once I wrote about happiness, maybe it didn't. But the reality is, I am a very happy person. There are some really good insights. And if you'd like, I can share a few of them with you about how to
Well,
be
yeah, I
happy.
think that's a good idea because people could really use that insight right now.
So in one of the early chapters, I talk about the two decisions that are most likely to impart the greatest amount of happiness or misery, depending on whether you make a good decision or not. And uh, now, the decision I'm going to say, you might say, well, yeah, no kidding, duh. But again, I back it up with real psychological and scientific insights. So number one, the person that you choose to spend your life with, your spouse choice, is fundamentally important, because if I wake up every morning and the person next to me is one that I either go, yes, I can't believe I'm waking up next to this person, or you go, oh, God damn, I'm waking up next to this person, that's already going to determine my existential trajectory. Now, if I return to that person at night after working and I have either one or the other, of course, that's going to affect my happiness. And then in between, I'm going off to work. And if I'm at a place of work that brings me great purpose and meaning, then I've won the happiness lottery. So then the question becomes, the devil is in the details. How can you ensure that you choose the right spouse and the right job? And here I explain very early in the book, unlike the typical self-help book that says, here are the 8 prescriptions to do this and the 7, and I guarantee you success. I'm a lot more, you know, uh, humble in my sales pitch. I say, look, life is about navigating statistical minefields. And all I can do is offer you prescriptions that increase the odds of you finding happiness, right? I can't guarantee it, right? Because again, each trajectory will result in a different outcome. So I'll give a few prescriptions about choosing the right job and choosing the right spouse. So in evolutionary psychology, there are two opposing maxims when it comes to mate choice. Either birds of a feather flock together or opposites attract. And your audience may or may not be surprised to know that if you're looking for maximizing your chances of long-term success of a marriage, then it's overwhelmingly the case that birds of a feather flock together. The question becomes, flocking on which feathers? Is it that we have to have the same eye color or the same hair color? And of course, it's not. It's we really have to have fundamentally shared foundational values, same belief system, same right? Those are really important. If I am a dogged, Orthodox Jewish practitioner and you are a caustic atheist, well, yes, maybe love conquers all, but you're certainly putting the statistical odds against your marriage working. So birds of a feather truly do flock together. Opposites attract works well for a short-term, dalliance behind the bushes. I may be sexually restrained, you may be sexually outgoing. That complementarity might lead to a nice get together. But for long term union, birds of a feather flock together. When it comes to finding the optimal job, so I argue that there are two things that you can do that can, again, augment your chances. Number one, if all other things equal, if you can find a job that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse. Now, that could mean many things. A chef creates, an architect creates, a podcaster creates, a stand-up comic creates, a professor and author creates. All of these folks are in completely different domains, but what's happening is until they came along, the bridge didn't exist. The stand-up comedy routine didn't exist. The book didn't exist. The plate of culinary art didn't exist. And so there is something unique in terms of finding purpose and meaning when you create something out of nothing, right? So I always think to myself, I say, I'm going to open my laptop now and I'm going to open my Word document. And right now, there isn't a single letter that I've written in my next book. And then one day, after 12, 14, 16 months of very hard work, I will hit the send button and I will send it
Mhm.
off to the publisher. And then a year later, people will send me selfies of them sitting at a beach in Dubai reading that book. That has nothing to do with money that I make off the sale of that book. The feeling of satisfaction that I get, the sense of purpose and meaning I get of someone who's sitting in Dubai at the beach could have chosen 9,000 other things to do that day. And yet somehow my book won. My God, that's an incredible privilege. So number one, all other things equal, if you can find a job that allows you to create, you're well on your way to being occupationally happy. The second one is I call it uh, temporal freedom. So I work very, very long days. I work very, very hard, but I feel as though I'm never working because I really am an intellectual entrepreneur, short of having to be teaching a course at a particular time on a particular day or having a departmental meeting. I'm just a vagabond. I'm off to some cafe now to work for 3 hours on this next paper I'm working on. Then I'm having a great chat with Yasmine on her show. Then I'm going to go off and start thinking about some of the structure for my next book. And by having that temporal freedom, I feel very fulfilled. Now, compare that to, say, someone who works in the factory line where they don't even have the dignity to choose when they can take a bathroom break. It's union mandated. At 10:15, you get a 5-minute bathroom break, and at 12, you get. So, if possible, if you can hit those two marks, you're going to be happy. And if you want me to give you other prescriptions, I can go ahead, but I'll cede the
Well,
floor back to you.
I just thought it was really interesting, the one that you started with, and then, both of them, because they really lead to each other. Because if you didn't have your wife to be the support for you, then you wouldn't be able to have this freedom that you're speaking of. So you
100%.
chose the right bird of the right feather, or she
Indeed.
did.
Indeed. Hopefully both.
And that allowed you to have, yeah, that's really beautiful that that worked out for you so nicely, and hopefully your book will speak to so many people and will allow them to also make good decisions for their future
Thank you.
happiness. I'm going to ask Ellen Abrams to unmute herself because she has a good question for you, Gad. Go
Hi.
ahead, Ellen.
Hi.
So, Gad, thank you so much already. So enriching and heartening. And my question is that my daughter graduated from McGill. She's in her mid-30s now. And even while she was in university, she would come home sometimes and I would be aghast and remark to her, "You've drunk the Kool-Aid." And this was about various things. But, to my regret now, I didn't pursue it further, didn't enter into conversations with her. So what I'm wondering is if you have any recommendations for parents for how to speak with our children. She's very focused on Gaza, Palestine, and is not seeing the bigger picture, but she's even having trouble really parsing that out. And she's thoughtful, she's intelligent. But we've gotten to the point where I've just said, okay, this is a no-go area for us. We can't talk about it. So is there
Yes. No, I get it.
Thank you. Thank
So I'm going to give you first an optimistic answer, and then there's a small shred of possible pessimism. Okay. So we'll navigate through both possibilities. So in chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind, I have a chapter titled How to Seek Truth. And forgive me, it's going to be a bit of a slightly longer answer, but I'm going to get to a final conclusion. In the chapter on how to seek truth, I offer an epistemological tool to establish how do you know that something is true. So if I want to demonstrate that Uh, for example, toy preferences have a sex specificity because of biology, right? Most social scientists think that the reason why Johnny plays with trucks and the reason why Linda plays with dolls is because of, sexist gender role socialization from the parents, okay? And I want to come along and prove to you, no, there are actually clear biological and evolutionary reasons why those sex-specific toy preferences exist. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to demonstrate the veracity of my position? Well, I'm going to build what I call a nomological network of cumulative evidence, which is a fancy way of saying I'm going to amass as many distinct lines of evidence in support of my position. So I won't build the whole network here, but I'll give you enough of it so that you get a sense of how you would go about doing that. So I might show you data from developmental psychology that shows you that children who are too young to be socialized already exhibit those sex-specific toy preferences. So already that is a very, very, I mean, that's already the death nail on the whole story. It's a mic drop. I'm done. But I'm not going to stop there. I can then show you data from across cultures that shows that those exact toy preferences exist in exactly that form. I could also bring you data from across eras. I could bring you data from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where children depictions on funerary monuments show little boys and little girls playing with the exact same toys that little boys and little girls play with today. I can get you data from other species. I can get you data from vervet monkeys, rhesus monkeys, and chimpanzees showing you that they exhibit the same sex-specific toy preferences as human infants do. So as you can see, I am drowning you in a unassailable, impossible to debate against tsunami of evidence. So the optimistic part of my answer, so now I'm going to tie it to your daughter and to anything that one is trying to argue. The optimistic part is that as long as you allow me to show you the nomological network of cumulative evidence, then I can flip you. In other words, as long as you come to the right, I mean, as long as you say, I'm willing to have the mind vaccine administered on me, then hopefully we can have a valuable exchange. The pessimistic part, hence you might see where I'm going with this, is if you say, la, 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 I don't want to hear it, right? I'm not taking the mind vaccine. Well, then it's impenetrable, right? Because how can I persuade you of an opposing position if you're not willing to grant me the courtesy of at least laying out the evidence? So if your daughter is sufficiently open to having the nomological network displayed, then she stands a chance. If she is so dogged and dogmatic in her anchored position that she doesn't want the vaccine, then she's a lost cause. Now, the reason why, so one of the things that I've learned in my long career now in public engagement is I can very quickly gauge whether you are in the former category or in the latter one, right?
Yeah.
Life is short and it involves a lot of trade-offs. Therefore, I can't be wasting an hour of my time trying to build a nomological network to someone who's already told me, I'm not buying your stuff. So you'll have to decide whether your daughter is redeemable, but there is a vaccine. Whether the person wishes to have it administered or not is a different story.
And in summary, that's why I don't debate Muslims.
And that's why I don't debate, by the way, intelligent design people who say evolution is a Zionist hoax. And that's why I don't debate people who are young earth creationists who say the earth is 6,000 years, because there is no amount. I know that epistemologically we exist in universes that can never intersect. I could never show you any evidence that would cause you to change your mind. And to your point, the hardcore Muslims are never going. So there's no point in people say, oh, but you're a coward. Why don't you debate some moronic extremist Muslim guy? Because there's no way you're going to come around to me, right? I say up, you say down. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in before I go and
Of course,
say,
Ellen.
in defense and love of my daughter, I cut her more slack than anyone else in the world. And even though I do think you're right, she's unreachable right now is my qualification for now. She's unreachable.
Inshallah, as we say.
It's mixed in with mother-daughter stuff and all sorts of stuff. But thank you.
My pleasure.
Ellen, you know what? Just keep dropping the seeds, and
Exactly.
then one day she might be ready for that vaccine God's
Amen.
talking about.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next, Norm had a good question for you. Norm, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Yep. Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, I had two questions. I think are you referring to the first one, Yasmine?
I only saw one, so
Okay.
you go
I'll
ahead.
go
Choose
first.
whichever one you prefer.
It's one thing to speak up when you have no loved ones living with you. How do you square bracing violent and aggressive ideologies like radical Islamism or wokeism when you know followers of these ideologies are willing and actually do threaten you for speaking up?
Threaten your livelihood as well as your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer this. Oftentimes when I answer in the way I'm about to answer, it kind of, it's a slap of reality in people's faces. Do you know those 18-year-olds who landed on the Normandy beaches? Do you know that the great majority of them knew that they were going to be mowed down like insignificant mosquitoes, yet they fought each other to say, yeah, I'll go. I want to go. So in other words, there is no war, whether it be an ideological war for the soul of the West or an actual physical war, that you can be a combatant and yet be guaranteed safety. Now, I'm not saying this in a cavalier way that I don't recognize that people have real concerns about, their livelihoods and so on. But let me share with you what my reality is. I can't go to campus without having security. Who's paying me for that? Who's giving me the medal of that? Who's erecting the statue of me for that? So boo-hoo-hoo that people have things to worry about. If you wish to have your societies be free of ideological cancers for your children and grandchildren, there's a fight to be had. Now, I understand that different people may modulate the risks that they wish to take as a function of certain realities. I get that, right? Even Aristotle, to a point in my happiness book where I talk about the inverted U, too little of something is not good, too much of something is not good, and typically the optimal point is some middle sweet spot. Well, Aristotle said that if a soldier is too cowardly, it's not good. If the soldier is so reckless in his bravery and his martyrdom, then he's going to die very quickly. So there has to be some temperance in the middle. So I appreciate that people face real consequences. But why don't you tell that to the brave people in the Middle East who are willing to take the risks, not to lose their job, but to lose their heads, and yet they speak. So no, I'm not very sympathetic to people. My cortisol level goes through the roof because of the stuff that I have to do. Even though I have a fun and positive and happy demeanor, my blood pressure goes up. When someone comes up to me in the street, I don't know if they're going to be a friend or a foe. So these are all costs that we have to bear. And that's why in the last chapter of The Parasitic Mind, I tell people, don't diffuse the responsibility onto others, right? You can decide how much you want to speak and where you want to speak. You simply don't have the right to say, I will never take a millimeter of risk. Let Gad, Saad, and Yasmine worry about it. They're big boys and girls. They'll bear the brunt of the risk, right? It might be you simply challenge your professor politely in class. It might be you challenge your friend at the pub who says some inane things about, women too can have penises. Whatever it is, you have to at least have the courage at some point to defend reality and the foundational values of the West. If not, you're a coward that doesn't deserve to live in free societies. I don't mean you in particular. I'm speaking in general.
Understood, and point well taken. I think my question was focused on when we have, like the American Sniper movie, you see the terrorist holding a drill to his son's head. It's one thing to put oneself at risk, like I see you do. Is how do you square the danger that can come to your loved ones for speaking up? Because most of us have children and husband or wife or partner.
So I'll flip it another way. I do what I do precisely out of the love for my children, right? Because my wife has often asked me, you have a very busy life as a professor. If you did nothing other than your lab work and your scientific work, you have a very busy life. Why do you need to be the savior of, I say, well, because if we didn't have young children and if it was only about us, maybe, even though it's not part of my personality, but maybe I could accept, let's just move to Sarasota and do paddle boarding and let someone else. I've done enough for the world. But I have young children and you have young children. If you're not willing to defend them from the monster that's coming down the road, well, I'm going to have to stand up and defend them. So it's actually paradoxically the opposite of your position. Yes, in the short term, my children might be at risk because someone recognizes me with them, but I'm doing what I'm doing precisely so that my children can live free in 20, 30, 50 years.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And if I could add to that, really, Gad, what you were saying about like just speak up a little bit in conversation in your classrooms with your coworkers or whatever, just if everybody just did their part a little bit, if people were just a little less cowardly, then we wouldn't be in this situation. The reason
Exactly.
why we're in this situation is because of cowardice. We've got bullies right now that are bullying us, and we are capitulating to them instead of standing up to them. And
Exactly.
if more of us did standing up, then it would be safer for all of us.
Can I link what you just said, Yasmine, to one of the most classic and famous psychology studies ever conducted? Okay, it's going to be a beautiful segue. Some of you may or may not know, so I'm going to explain the whole thing because I'm not going to assume that everybody knows it. One of the most famous experiments ever conducted in the behavioral sciences is by Solomon Asch, and these are called the Asch conformity experiments. And what Solomon Asch did is he basically said, I want to see if I'm able to get people to conform to lies that are astronomically obvious. Because so do you believe your lying eyes or do you go ahead with the group, right? And so what he did is he developed a very simple and elegant experiment. I usually explain this at the start of pretty much any course that I teach, because I try to explain to my students that good science does not have to be convoluted. As a matter of fact, some of the most beautiful and elegant science, you could explain it to a 10-year-old. That's actually the measure of how powerful it is. Okay. So basically imagine this. I'm going to put 3 lines here. The 3 lines are very different in terms of their length. Line A is this long, line B is this long, line C is this long. And then I'm going to put a 4th line called X, which is the same length as one of the 3 ABC. And I'm going to ask people which of the lines ABC is the same as X. You follow? Now, so let's suppose A is this big, right? And X is this small. So we know for sure, absolutely, unless you are congenitally blind, we know that that's the wrong answer. If people say the correct answer is A, they're insane. The point of the experiment is to bring in a bunch of people into the lab, and then you put them in a line of, say, 8 people in a row. And the first 7 are really Confederates. Confederates is just a fancy term for they're in on the experiment. They're pretending that they are participants, but they are part of the experimental manipulation. Yes? And so the reality is that the only real participant is the 8th one. But unbeknownst to him or her, that the other 7 are fake ones. So I'm going to start with the first one and say, which of the 3 lines ABC is the same as X? And remember, if I say A, it's the unbelievably not same distance, right? So the first person says A, the second person says A, the third person says A. So as you see that we're going down to that final person, as a matter of fact, you can go on, I think it's probably available on YouTube, where they actually filmed the experiment. Now, what do you think happens in terms of the nonverbal cues of the eighth person, the real subject. When the first person says A, the response is, what the fuck, right? It's, what, are you insane? Then as we go down, the real subject is looking around. Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? Am I insane or are you insane? And then by the time we get to the eighth one, the body language is crushed. They are crushed by the weight of conformity. I've literally lectured what I just said maybe 40 million times. As I lecture it, I still get goosebumps. Why? Because that's it. That's the whole enchilada. You just explain one of the most fundamental features of human nature using an experiment that a 7-year-old understands. Now, not everyone conformed, but even if a single person conformed, if now it was a lot more than one, but even if one had conformed, you'd say, how could the world have such a person exist? But you could look at it. It's a lie. So to Yasmine's point, so you could see why I gave that example. What happens to people is they look around the world, they see what they see. They get it. The problem is no one speaks. So maybe it's only me who's seeing this. Maybe, right? So the inaction, the cowardice, the tepidness of everyone creates a natural ash experiment whereby we're all quiet because we think that if I am the one who speaks out, I must be the insane one. That's why I tell people, activate your inner honey badger. Again, the reason why I say that, the honey badger has been ranked as the most ferocious animal in the animal kingdom, which is saying a lot. There's a lot of ferocious animals. It's the size of a small dog, and yet it is so ferocious that you can have 6 adult lions be intimidated by it. How could that be? Well, because it's insane, right? People look at it or animals look at it and say, I'm not messing with that. This guy's insane. Well, when I say activate your inner honey badger, it's not a call to violence, right? It's not a call to physical violence. It's a call to being ferocious and feverish in your defense of reality, of common sense, of human dignity, of reason, of liberty. Be irate, be angry, don't be cowardly. So that's why I say activate your inner honey badger. So you're exactly right, Yasmin. This problem could be resolved by next Tuesday if everybody rose up. The problem is, I know human nature, and I know that they won't rise up. They will rise up in 50 years at the cost of 20 million people dying.
Let's hope it doesn't take that long, and let's hope the number of casualties is not that high. But I agree with your analogy of the dropping the ball. I do think that this is going to be something that is, you know, unpreventable. And I think a lot of it has to do with that experiment that you described. I would guess that probably about 70 to 80 people conformed. Like the few people that stand up and say, hang on a minute, what do you mean men can get pregnant? Or hang on a minute, what do you mean Islam is the religion of peace? Whatever it is, that's the current nonsense that we're trying to convince people of. And especially when you're in a university situation where you feel so insecure and you're there to learn, and then your professors are sharing this stuff and telling you this stuff. So you already feel that sense of like, well, they must know what they're talking about. They're the ones with the doctorates. I'm just a first year. I'm just here to learn. And so you end up, it's just such a successful, institution for indoctrinating whatever it is, billions of dollars coming from Qatar or whatever their Marxist DEI or whatever it is. It's just a perfect place for it.
Exactly.
But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for that. This is like really, I feel like I'm in one of your classes right now. So this is great. Hannah, you're next.
Okay, hi. I'm just leaving my camera off because an abundance of caution. So it's very cool to see your face though. I wanted to ask actually about oppression and internal Jewish dynamics, basically. So, for context, I'm Ashkenazi, Holocaust offspring, and all that good stuff. And my partner, though, is Mizrahi from a Muslim majority country, like you, but anyway, I'm not going to say what country. And his family still lives there, and it's not safe at all. That's why my camera's off. So I don't want to put anyone in danger at all. But anyways, so I wanted to ask you about, there's like about 35,000 Jews still in the Middle East, not Israel countries. And I wanted to ask about this big contrast in their lived experiences, like the oppression that they live today, and that like nobody cares, especially, well, not especially, but like Ashkenazi progressive anti-Zionist Jews, who we used to call them tokens, but now they're a growing in number. And I'm just completely like, I don't even know how to deal with my own community because you know, I think I'm progressive. I don't know. Like I really care about stuff, and I don't understand how to reconcile our worlds together.
Right.
Like just especially anti-Zionist Ashkenazi throwing other Jews under the bus all the time. So I guess my question is, we know that mainstream Jewish narratives are very Ashkenazi centric. And maybe can you talk about this dynamic and how it's shaping things out, and maybe all of this in a relationship to like stuff about indigeneity and stuff like that?
Sure.
And
I mean, there are several factors at play there. Let me begin with one that, is straight out of the parasitic mind. So does anybody recognize the name Anna Epstein? She became famous for a few seconds a couple of months ago. She's the Jewish student from either Boston College or Boston University that was caught on camera ripping down the posters of Jewish babies, right? So Anna Epstein is so much more progressive and empathetic than all of you monstrous cretins, that she has attained another level of enlightenment, whereby despite her being Jewish, she's staring down in rejection of the Jewish baby posters, right? Now, why am I saying this under the parasitic framework? Because let me explain why I used the neuroparasitological framework in the book The Parasitic Mind. So let's take the wood cricket. The wood cricket, I mean, a literal cricket, it despises water. It doesn't want to do anything with water. But when its brain is parasitized by a neuroparasite, a particular hairworm, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump into water to its hapless death, because for it to complete its reproductive cycle, it meaning the parasite, it needs to happen in water. So it alters the neuronal circuitry of the wood cricket so that it takes something that it has an innate fear of, and then it jumps into the water to its suicide. Those are your Ashkenazi friends. They're parasitized. They went to Oberlin, they went to Wellesley, they went to Harvard. They know nothing about the reality. What they do know is suicidal empathy. Drum roll, topic of my next book, right? Which is, it is the empathy module being hyperactive and misdirected, right? Homeless people more important than homeowners. Noble MS-13 gang members coming out of the southern border more important than legal citizens, and on and on. So when the suicidal empathy model misfires, hyperactivates, you get all sorts of policy problems that arise, and hence this is likely to be the topic of my next book. So what your Ashkenazi friends are doing is they are parasitized by various neuroparasites. They don't have the inoculation that comes from having lived the reality of the experience of the Mizrahi Jews, where they could say, well, let me teach you about what the reality is. And so for all of those reasons, they can't extricate themselves from the fact that unlike those really combative, warlike Mizrahi Jews, remember, the Jews from the Middle East are often referred to as the blacks of the Jews. Even just being Arabic, when I used to play soccer, we used to be called sand N-word, right? So what happens with, so there's, as I said, it's a complicated story, but there's definitely a dynamic where the Ashkenazis are, they're the Oberlin folks. They're the Wellesley folks. They're just infinitely empathetic, right? Free Palestine, queers for Palestine. They're enlightened, unlike those other warring black Jews. And so for all those reasons, they hold the position that they do. Now, some of them have woken up, right? Bill Ackman has woken up, yes, but it frustrates me that
But
it's
people have to be woken up personally. Just wanted to
that's what
say
I was
that.
going to say.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to
Sorry
say.
to interrupt. I ruined
No,
it.
please. I'm glad you said it, because the problem, and that's another feature of the architecture of the human mind, is that diabetes doesn't exist unless it hits my home. There is no such thing as diabetes. Okay. But once it hits my son, type 1 diabetes, oh, there is such a thing as diabetes. Once it hits me as type 2 diabetes, so it has to personally hit me. So Bill Ackman, and I'm not taking anything away from him. We follow each other. He knows me. I'm hoping to have a chat with him soon. He's a lovely guy. He's an incredibly successful guy. But Bill Ackman is a manifestation of all those super influential, wealthy, liberal Jews who it took for reality to be 1 millimeter away from you for you to say, oh, damn. But when Gad Saad was standing, to an earlier question you asked, at the top of the mountain going, wake up, people were saying, come on, this doesn't affect me. I go to the cool parties in Cambridge. So that's the problem, is that oftentimes the only way to get people to respond to a reality is exactly what Yasmin said, once it comes to my home. What do you mean Sharia zones? There are no Sharia zones. I don't see that. There are no hijabs where I live. Oh shit, look at that. In 7 years, every 7 out of 10 women are veiled. But 4 years ago, you told me that there is no such thing. I'm exaggerating. That's the failure of the capability of humans to extrapolate patterns, right? That's one of the reasons, by the way, why my satire is so effective, and why I often refer to it, and others do, as prophetic satire. Why? Because I'm able to take a lunacy today that people are espousing, and I just extrapolate it to its extreme boundary condition, and then I satirize it there, and I wait with my hands crossed until reality catches up to my satire. Let me give you a quick example. About 8 years ago, I put out a clip, with my whole woke wig and everything, where I was introducing a new field of study called social justice mathematics. Because I have a mathematics background, I used all the terminology from mathematics, and I came up with all kinds of bullshit. You can't use the term irrational numbers because that marginalizes mental illness. I did all that stuff. And guess what? It now exists. Well, is it because I'm a prophet? No, it's because I'm able to take where we are in point A, trace out the slippery slope, and then mock it at point B. That's what happens. And so what your Ashkenazi friends are doing is they don't see that slippery slope. They're patting their backs in terms of how progressive they are until reality hits them hard tomorrow morning.
Thank you. I don't think they want to see that. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Daniel is next with a question that quite a few people had sort of variations of this question. Susanna, hopefully your question will be answered in this as well. Daniel, go ahead.
Yes, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. I'll are some of the leaders in Canada, the politician leaders, gonna work against anti-Semitism? And and if so, what are they going to do? And
Nothing. They're going to generate vacuous, empty platitudes. Hate has no home here. We will fight anti-Semitism by combating Islamophobia. Hence, that's why I'm somber, because there's absolutely no stomach. There is no demonstration that there are any cataclysmic leader who's going to come and quickly eradicate this stuff. I only see it worsening, and therefore, so to answer your question, I don't see any serious effort.
none of them are going to grow courage. And I don't know, I remember hearing Trump for the upcoming election telling we are going to deport all the jihadist sympathizer and all that stuff. None of them are going to have the same courage as he having.
Not even close. I mean, the closest I see a leader doing that, and people are now like, oh, he's a Nazi, is, you know where I felt incredibly safe walking? Hungary. I went to Hungary twice over the past few years. The most recent one was on the invitation of the president of Hungary, and I didn't feel any Jew hatred. You know why? Because they have a closed border immigration policy, so that what Hungary is exhibiting today is how the West was 25 years ago, where Jews actually felt completely comfortable. Look, this is not necessarily a response to Daniel, but it's kind of building on the offshoot of what he asked. On any given day, I always like to use this analogy. Let's suppose you're trying to lose weight, okay? On any given day, only 3 possible states of the world can happen as relating to your weight. Because of the actions you took that day, your weight could go up, your weight can stay exactly the same, or your weight can go down. Is that true? There's no other possibility, right? And so if you have enough days where your weight went down, then you will have weight loss, right? And I lost a lot of weight over the past few years. Okay, now let's apply that very simple principle that there are 3 possibilities for a phenomenon, okay, to immigration. If you let in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who originate from societies where using an extraordinary number of disparate data, for example, nonpartisan Pew surveys that show that people who come from those societies, are you all paying attention? 95 to 99% of polled people exhibit hatred towards the Jew. Right now, let me state this again. If I said that 10% of the people from those societies exhibit disfavorable attitude towards the Jew, that should stop you in your tracks. 10% is a very big number. But if I say it's 95 to 99, now we let in 1,000, now we let in 100,000, now we let in 6 million. Is Jew hatred in the host nation going to increase? Is it going to stay the same, or is it going to decrease? It doesn't take fancy Professor Dr. Gad Saad to get that for you. But again, just like the Solomon Asch experiment, I don't want to see it. I don't believe my lying eyes. So now people go, my God, where does this Jew hatred come from? Where is it? How could it be? Well, you've let in millions of people that define their societies contra their Jew hatred. I got diabetes, the Jew did it. My wife cheated on me, the Jew did it. My store didn't work, the Jew did it. It's sunny outside, it's the Jew. It's rainy outside, it's the Jew. Now we import 10 million of those people. What happens? Now, I don't need to also give the old, but I know millions of Muslims who are lovely. Yasmine comes from that culture. I don't have any ill will. I only have love for her. I know practicing Muslims that are very good friends of mine. But does Islam contain tenets that are perfectly incongruent with Western values, nothing could be clearer. And yet not a single leader in the West is willing to say what I just said, which is a terribly banal and obvious statement. Therefore, if we keep this up, the West will die. It might take 500 years, it might take 5 years, but it will die. Save this conversation.
I think it's also
And-
the perfect storm between those groups that you mentioned, and then also, of course, the Marxism that has taken over our universities and our countries, and the anti-Semitism that's there as well. And so the two of them together have that shared hate, that alliance.
Exactly. Well, it's I mean, to use the medical analogy or terminology, it's comorbidity, right? I mean, it's bad if I am 60 pounds overweight. It's worse if I'm 60 pounds overweight and I smoke. It's worse if I'm 60 pounds overweight, I smoke, and I never exercise. So there's no mechanism to protect my heart or my blood pressure. That's what you're seeing in the West, exactly to your point. There's a perfect confluence of every possible problem that has resulted in the problem that we're facing today.
Okay, can I have another question? Do you think about doing if it's going to reach hell in Canada, if you allow me to exaggerate, do you think about doing Aliyah, which means immigration to Israel?
Yes. Well, it's funny that you say this because when
Think about this. Think about this like this. We
Yes.
are actually
He's
forced
trying to
to have-
recruit you, I think.
We are
He works
forced
for
to have
Israeli
close-
immigration. Like,
We are forced to
come
have
work in
close
our
borders,
universities.
guys. We are forced to have close borders because the Middle East is wild as hell.
Yes. Look, when we were deciding where we were, well, I was 11 years old, but when my parents were deciding where we were going to leave, my father was very keen on the family moving to Israel. I'm talking now in the 70s. And in a sense, luckily, my mother won that argument. I say luckily, not out of any disrespect for Israel, because of course, most of my family lives in Israel and so on. My extended family, that is. But in 1982, when Israel went into Lebanon to clean some house there, had my father won that debate, I would have been the first guy in the tanks moving to Lebanon, because that would have been in my first year of military service. I'm the Arabic speaking guy from Lebanon. So in a sense, the possibility of us making Aliyah has been in discussion in my family for many, many years. So the reason why I'm answering that question is because then the next issue is, well, I'm too old to go to be a commando, but I do have young children. Now, on the one hand, I could say, well, sure, I want them to serve and protect Israel. But on the other hand, having escaped all that lunacy, I'm a bit tepid to go back into the cauldron of hate. But I hear you. Israel might end up being the only safe place for Jews. So your point is well taken.
Can I have one?
What about the rest of us?
Sorry.
Where do I go? Where's
Uh,
my Israel?
Well, it's hungry.
Sarah hears me. Like, what about us? Yes, go ahead.
No, I hear you. Listen, I've sat with my wife at a cafe where we look at each other and we say, where to next? It's very, I mean, it's clear that our long-term future, not even our long-term future, our medium-term future is not going to be in Montreal. It's truly untenable. Maybe some red state in the US where at least I have the possibility of carrying a gun so that if I have a maniac coming at me, I can go out with dignity. By the way, I'm just free associating here. One, I tell the story in the parasitic mind of a recurring nightmare that I had for close to, I mean, I probably haven't had it in 10 years, maybe, but the first 25, 30 years, having left Lebanon, I would have a consistent nightmare, which was one of two forms. the bad guys are coming to get us and my gun malfunctions, or the bad guys are coming for us and I ran out of ammo. And I told that story to Rob O'Neill, I mean, literally the guy who killed bin Laden, who was part of the SEAL 6 Navy team. And as I told him that story, he goes, "Oh, many of us have that dream in the military, and it's called the warrior dream or something like that, right?" Why am I saying all this? Because now I feel like I'm back to being the 10-year-old kid in Lebanon whose life depends on whether the bad guys come in or not and get me. Whereas, at least to Yasmine's comment, if I can be in a place where at least I have a fighting chance. One of the things that I love about the US, notwithstanding all of the blue states and all that, is that there are more guns in the US than there are people. So if the Americans are going to go out, they're going out fighting, right? Whereas Canada is the singularly most castrated, feminized society that the world has ever created. When I had death threats on me and I went to the police and said, "Well, is there a way for me to get a gun license? Is there?" I mean, they knew me, they knew how high profile I was, they knew of the threats on me. They said, "No, when they come to you, call 911. Yes, because when Muhammad comes to knife me, I'll just call 911. Wait a minute, just hold on, Muhammad. Just wait till the cops come in 12 minutes, right? Whereas if I'm carrying, hey, you may kill me, but I may kill you back. So you need to go to a place where you still have the personal dignity to be able to defend yourself. And regrettably, there are fewer and fewer places in the West where you can do that.
Are you happy with that, Daniel?
Just one final question. I'm sorry for holding on for the rest of you. I understand. Let's just say that a relative of mine is dating a Persian Jew. And she told she has an uncle that's still in Iran. Uncle Jew that's still in Iran. And she only saw some family members from Iran 3 times in her life. And we try to, let's just say they tried to convince them maybe to make a move here, but they are scared to lose everything they built in Iran, even though my mother also told them there is no cost for freedom. At least here, the same Persian Jew also told me that they had a hard time leaving Israel for going back to Iran because they finally didn't have to walk around covering their head and, you know, be free from all that chaos. Like, how do you convince someone to just forget all of that and I don't know, maybe they...
Yeah, I get your question. To our earlier comment about it has to hit you in the face before you wake up to it, right? We only left Lebanon when it became impossible to be in Lebanon, right? I mean, most of my extended family had already left. They had read the writing on the wall. And yet my parents, having been well entrenched within Lebanese society, just thought there's no reason for. I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that it's hard when you've built a whole life, right? You have your business, you have your life, you have your network. I mean, you're Lebanese. You're not Israeli, right? I mean, yes, you're Jewish, but you're Lebanese. You listen to Arabic music. Your cooking is Lebanese. Everything is Lebanese, right? So it's only when it hits you and there is really no alternative. It's either I leave or die. And as a matter of fact, I mean, to that point, remember I mentioned earlier that even when we escaped death in Lebanon, my parents kept returning to Lebanon, right? I mean, it was in 1980 when they were finally kidnapped by Fatah. It was one of their many return trips. So you might say, how is that rational? Well, that makes no sense. You escaped. We got on that plane where you put the Star of David on me. How the hell did you ever go back? That makes no sense. Well, it makes sense if you understand that human nature is such that you've built a life. So I don't think I have a magic recipe for you. All that I can say is that it if they are truly entrenched within Iranian society, the only time that they will wake up is when they are calling them to, sorry to say, to hang them. And then suddenly they'll either wake up and say it's time to go to Israel, or bad things will happen to them. That's the reality of, yeah,
That's the story of the Holocaust too, though, isn't it?
exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Mhm.
Exactly right. It won't affect us. We'll be able to lay low. I think it's too good here. What if we go somewhere else? We'll never be accepted. I know that our neighbors are really nice and they'll protect us. There are an endless number of reasons why it isn't currently the right time to leave until it's too late. Now, by the way, this reality of the miracle of having been able to escape incredibly small odds of leaving Lebanon when we did, to link it back to the happiness book, I actually use the tragedy of my background to make me happy in life. Why? Because whenever I'm going through something in my daily life that causes me to go down on myself, that this sucks, I have pressure, I can always use the pill in my internal dialogue and say, wait a minute, you're complaining because a lot of people want to talk to you on the media and you have to travel to speak about your book. Remember, you escaped the Middle East, and suddenly that can contextualize for me whatever is pissing me off, stressing me, causing me anxiety, making me feel as if life is dreary, against that backdrop. So I truly think that we can take these stories of true victimhood, not manufactured
Yeah.
BS victimhood, and actually use them to our advantage. Yes, they're part of our story. They're part of the regrettable realities of life. But boy, have I used that to actually lead a happy, enriched life, because I know that those PLO militia that were driving us to the airport could have taken us to a ditch and put a bullet in our head. And that's it. You're not speaking to me right now. So against that backdrop, I lead a pretty good life.
That sounds very similar to me and the choices I've made as well, Gad.
Right.
So again, many variations of this same question, and I want to end on this question, and we're kind of
Sure.
going to be looking to you now as the hope, the guru. It's a big question. A lot of really sad stories in the comments, and especially sad one about a woman who was sharing a story about a Lebanese friend of hers. You know, they'd gotten pregnant together twice, raised their kids together. They're really good friends. And then, of course, on October 7th, that woman was one of the first people to, you know, immediately celebrate the death of innocent people in Israel. So they're obviously not friends anymore. Many stories like that. Lots of people sharing, just feeling scared, feeling depressed. Some people are asking if they need to convert to Islam, if that's where we're at. But I'm going to kind of collect all of those questions and ask you, how will the West survive? What can we do now? Like, where do you see a future, a hopeful future? Is it, yeah, what can be done at this point?
So on the grand kind of one sentence, you cannot have in your society people who ascribe to an ideology that is manufactured to be antithetical to every one of the foundational values of your society. That could never coexist. There isn't just part of pancreatic cancer that's okay, right?
Mhm.
There isn't some optimal level of pancreatic cancer. There isn't. Now don't no, I'm not saying that Muslims are cancer. No,
Yeah, I get
Islam
you.
Islam is completely incompatible and inconsistent and incongruent with fundamental tenets of human flourishing. Nothing could be clearer. Does that mean that there aren't hundreds of millions of Muslims who are incredibly lovely, incredibly peaceful, kind, generous, spiritual, happy? Of course not. We're talking about an ideology. do these two ideologies, one is called Western liberties and freedoms, enlightenment, secularism, are they consistent with Islam when as properly practiced? There is cafeteria Islam where I just ignore the things that I don't like, right? There are endless Muslims that don't want to kill Jews. But what does Islamic canons say about the Jews? Well, that's incontestable. So on a general level, there needs to be a complete rediscussion, reevaluation of our current immigration policies. So that's at the broad kind of macro level. Nothing could either worsen things or improve them more than that. Okay. If you want to come, you're from Yemen or Pakistan, and you want to leave those values check them at the door, then come in, my brother. Let's build a greater fun society together. If you don't want to leave those, then you're not welcome, right? So that's number one. At the individual level, I say, to my earlier point, there is a way to turn this around. The reason why it can't be is because we are in a gargantuan Solomon Asch simulation. It is part of the architecture of the human mind to not act. The default value of humans is incredible cowardice. That's why I say you need to add cowardice as an 8th deadly sin. Now, it could be included in sloth, or avarice, which is one of the 7 deadly sins, but I'd like to add it as its own category. The reason why heroic figures are heroic and then revered in history is because they are anomalous, right? They're outliers, right? It's the hero that is different from all the cowards that had the courage to stand up. So what I implore people is to somehow look within themselves, and it sounds like I'm speaking harshly, but I am trying to be optimistic to Yasmine's request. You have to find your spine and you have to find your testicles, irrespective of whether you're male or female. That's why I, for example, say that most academics belong to a unique biological species. They're called invertebrate castrati. They don't have a spine. They don't have testicles.
We're both academics. So
there you go. So you
not all academics.
But you could
Yes, I
confirm that
definitely
you agree
agree.
that most of our
Yeah.
colleagues are
Yeah.
spineless and castrated. Okay. So you can't fight a war, whether it be an ideological war or a physical war, where one side is unbelievably committed in their zeal and the other side is committed in its self-implosion, right?
Yeah.
Human history is defined, all human history in every corner of the world is defined. I'm gonna give you the 2 sentence of all history. There is a river. There is one group of folks that live on one side of the river. There's another group of folks that live on the other side of the river. Each group is looking at the water supply at the other side and at the pretty women on the other side and is saying, I think I'd like to get some of that. And the only thing that stops each of those 2 groups from acting out on their desire is because each of the 2 groups knows that there are men in each of those 2 groups that are not going to lay down dying. In some cases, we decide, you know what, it's worth fighting for it. In other cases, we size ourselves up and say, yeah, those guys across the river look pretty nasty. I better keep quiet. For the first time in history, we have a violation of this river analogy or story. We have one group of folks who say, we're coming for you. And the other side says, I will actually show you how to get to the bedroom where I put my children. That's how progressive I am. I will show you the exact roadmap of where we hid our women. That's how progressive I am. Those 2 can't work. If those 2 stay together, I can predict with absolute assuredness who's going to win. So now, here's the optimism part. Not all men, I say men, it could also be women, but you know what, I'm speaking in the generic. Not all men in the West don't have testicles. The problem is they may wake up too late down the road where it will require a lot more violence for it to solve it. The issue will be addressed. And I truly believe that the West will wake up and win, but it's going to be bloody because right now, the enemy ideology is in every street corner. At one point, it was on the other side of the river. So as long as the two rivers we didn't cross, you could live your life as best as you want, and we live it as best as we can. But once we say we suck, we're useless, we're garbage, everything about us is wrong, and everything about you is beautiful and noble, the other side says, boy, they're idiots. As a matter of fact, by the way, I'll end with this. It's maybe not the optimism that you wanted, but maybe it wakes you up. I've spoken to a lot of Arabic people. Usually this happened before they knew who I was, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't say the things that they do. In some cases, they're friends that actually do say it openly to me. They say the West is a woman to be mounted. I could even translate it for you in Arabic, but it won't matter for most people, right? So listen to the imagery. The West is a woman you mount. That's the mindset, right? I explained this in a recent article that I wrote for National Post. I called it cultural blindness, or lacking cultural theory of mind. What does that mean? When the West acts magnanimous, compassionate, forgiving, empathetic, they think that those values will be treated as virtuous by the other camp, and that will be reciprocated. You know how it's analyzed by the other side? Weak, 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 weak. I'm mounting you. Hey, get ready. I hope you're ready. I'm about to mount you. You ready? So that's what people don't understand. That's why people like me who speak with that cadence, with that intonation. By the way, on Monday, I'm speaking with Mossab, the son of the founder of Hamas. When you hear him speaking, to me, it's like music to the ears, because when he takes on two obnoxious students who are wearing the keffiyeh, who grew up in the US and who are doing free Palestine, he doesn't mince his words. He doesn't fool around. And that, to them, it hits them. They don't know how to react. So that's why I always say it's immigrants who are the strongest defenders of the West. It's Yasmine. It's Ayan Hirsi Ali. It's Gad Saad. Why? Because we've sampled the buffets of all societies. And so we know that what's out there is not what you have in the West. And so we come and say, be careful, you're replicating the Middle East. And most Westerners go, oh, come on, stop exaggerating, stop screaming from the top of the mountain. So I do think that once people do wake up, we can hopefully turn it around and have a better future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I hope so. I hope lots of people listen to you, your Sad Truth, read your books, listen to this podcast, hear what you're saying. You're preaching to the choir with me, because I'm one of those people that's also considered an alarmist. And what do you talk? Because they don't see what we see. They don't know what we know. After October 7th, a lot of eyes were opened. I had Israeli friends who would tell me, Yasmine, you're just so much.
Yeah.
You need to relax. And after October 7th, they called me crying in some cases. One of my friends was in Tel Aviv on October 7th, and she called me and she was saying, I am so sorry. Like, I see what you were saying now. It's heartbreaking. You don't want them to know what you know. You know what I mean? Like what you were describing in a lot of this whole conversation is trauma. You are the result of childhood trauma. A lot of what you have done is a result of that, and people who have not seen the kind of, evil that humans are have the potential to do the way you have, the way I have, they don't believe that it exists. It's like you said, the diabetes doesn't exist because I don't have it, or nobody that I love has it. Everything. You said so many things in this conversation today that I really, we should just make like an entire quote book out of it and then just give it away for free, and just hope that people start to listen, pay attention, I don't know if there's any hope for Canada, but I really hope that that we do have Canadians that do start to pay attention. There were so many amazing comments for you here. People talking about how your book has changed their life,
Oh, wow.
their lives. Yeah, it's been really beautiful. But you know, it's just too much, too many comments of love and appreciation. So I'll just say on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for your time. Thank you
Thank you,
so much
guys.
for sharing so much of your life story and your experiences and your wisdom with us. And yeah, we're very, very grateful to have you here and to have you on our side.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind words. And guys, please get out there and speak out. We can win this. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are part of the evil juice. To those who are not, have a great weekend. I wish you a restful and fun weekend. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.